Say the word Appalachia, and most people picture the same thing. Banjos, bare feet, moonshine, poverty, a punchline dressed up as a place. But these mountains are older than bones, older than trees, older than almost every living thing that has ever existed on this planet. 480 million years old. They once stood as tall as the Himalayas. And long before anyone called them Appalachia, entire civilizations rose and fell in their valleys. The people who built them, the people who were forced out, the people who were exploited, and the people who fought back with rifles and dynamite. That story is one of the most extraordinary and overlooked in American history. Using special training on historical imagery, we are bringing those lost chapters back to life. This is the entire history of Appalachia. If that sounds like a journey worth taking, make sure you subscribe to the channel now, because this one goes deep. Let's start long before any European ever set foot on this continent. At least 10,000 years ago, Paleo-Indians were already living in the caves and rock shelters of what we now call Kentucky, Alabama, and West Virginia. By around 900 BCE, something remarkable was happening. The Hopewell culture was building enormous earthen mounds across southern Ohio and the surrounding valleys. These were not primitive dirt piles. They were ceremonial complexes, some covering acres, connected by trade networks that stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. Copper from Michigan, shells from Florida, obsidian from Yellowstone, all of it flowing through Appalachia. The Hopewell declined around 1300 CE, possibly due to warfare, but they gave way to the Mississippian cultures who built flat-topped mounds across the southern mountains. From them rose the Cherokee. By the mid-1600s, the Cherokee controlled most of southern Appalachia. They had a functioning agricultural system, a matrilineal society where women owned the property and the homes, and a combined population with the northern Iroquois and Algonquin tribes of around 60,000 people. The altitude of their mountain homes may have actually protected them from many of the diseases ravaging tribes closer to sea level. For centuries, the mountains were a fortress. Then Europe came looking for land. Starting in the early 1700s, a wave of immigrants began pouring through the port of Philadelphia. They were the Scots-Irish, descendants of Scottish lowlanders who had been planted in Northern Ireland by the English crown, only to face famine, rising rents, and religious persecution all over again. By the 1770s, at least 250,000 of them had arrived in the American colonies. The established English settlements along the coast did not want them, so colonial governments made them an offer: cheap land on the frontier. The catch: they would serve as a human shield between the colonies and native tribes who still controlled the interior. The Scots-Irish took the deal. They followed the Great Wagon Road from Pennsylvania down through the Shenandoah Valley and into the Carolinas, settling deep in the Appalachian backcountry. They brought with them Presbyterian churches, fiddle music, whiskey distilling, buttermilk, potatoes, and a deep distrust of centralized authority. They married into other communities, including native ones. They hunted, farmed, and built a culture defined by self-reliance, isolation, and stubbornness. When the American Revolution broke out, many of these Scots-Irish frontiersmen fought at the Battle of Kings Mountain in 1780, a victory that Theodore Roosevelt later called the turning point of the entire revolution. But independence for the colonies did not mean freedom for everyone in the mountains. In 1828, gold was discovered on Cherokee land in Georgia. The result was predictable. In 1830, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act. The Cherokee fought back through the courts, winning their case at the Supreme Court. It did not matter. President Andrew Jackson ignored the ruling. In 1838, 7,000 federal soldiers marched into the southern Appalachian highlands and began forcing Cherokee families from their homes at gunpoint. Approximately 16,000 Cherokee were rounded up, held in disease-ridden internment camps, and then marched over 1,000 miles to Oklahoma in the dead of winter. An estimated 4,000 died from cold, starvation, and disease. The Cherokee call it Nunada ul Tsunyi, the place where they cried. We call it the Trail of Tears. But a few hundred Cherokee escaped the roundup by hiding deep in the Great Smoky Mountains, in terrain so rugged the soldiers could not follow. Their descendants still live there today as the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. The mountains that once protected their ancestors protected them again. After the Cherokee were gone, the mountains entered a long quiet. The Civil War split Appalachia down the middle, with Union and Confederate sympathies dividing not just states, but individual families. West Virginia literally broke away from Virginia over the question of secession, becoming its own state in 1863. The fighting in the mountains was guerrilla warfare, neighbor against neighbor, and some communities never fully recovered. Then came coal, and everything changed. By the late 1800s, industrialists discovered that beneath those ancient mountains lay some of the richest coal deposits on Earth. Railroads punched into hollows that had been isolated for generations. Companies bought up mineral rights, sometimes for pennies an acre, from families who had no idea what they were signing away. Entire towns were built and owned by coal companies. The houses, the stores, the churches, the schools. Miners were paid not in dollars, but in scrip, company currency that could only be spent at the company store, almost always at inflated prices. Private police forces patrolled the streets. If a miner tried to organize, he was blacklisted. If he complained, his family was thrown into the road. By 1920, tensions had reached a breaking point. In Matawan, West Virginia, the town's police chief, Sid Hatfield, stood up to the Baldwin-Felts Detective Agency, the hired guns of the coal operators. A shootout on the streets left 7 detectives, 2 miners, and the mayor dead. Hatfield became a folk hero. A year later, he was assassinated on the courthouse steps in broad daylight. No one was convicted. That murder lit the fuse. In August of 1921, somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 armed coal miners, many of them World War I veterans, gathered at Lenz Creek Mountain in West Virginia. They tied red bandanas around their necks as a sign of solidarity, black and white miners marching side by side in a segregated nation. They called themselves the Redneck Army. Their plan was to march through Logan County and free imprisoned Union organizers in Mingo. Standing in their way was Blair Mountain, where Sheriff Don Chafin, whose salary was paid by the coal companies, had assembled 3,000 deputies and mine guards armed with machine guns. For 5 days, the two sides fought a war in the Appalachian forest. The coal operators dropped homemade bombs and chemical gas from private airplanes onto American citizens. Approximately 1 million rounds were fired. It was the largest armed labor uprising in United States history since the Civil War. It ended only when President Harding sent in the United States Army. The miners surrendered, not because they were defeated, but because they had no quarrel with the federal government. 925 miners were charged with murder and treason. Not a single coal operator faced charges for anything. The mines kept running. The mountains kept losing. By the 1960s, Appalachia was synonymous with poverty. 1 in 3 residents lived below the poverty line. In 1963, President Kennedy established a commission to study the region's economic despair. The following year, Lyndon Johnson launched his war on poverty from the front porch of a cabin in eastern Kentucky. In 1965, Congress created the Appalachian Regional Commission, a federal partnership that has since invested over $6 billion in the region. Roads were built, schools were funded. The Tennessee Valley Authority brought electricity to communities that had never had it. but the pattern repeated. When coal declined, nothing replaced it. When factories closed, towns emptied. And when pharmaceutical companies in the 1990s began aggressively marketing prescription opioids to a region with high rates of physical labor injuries and limited health care, the result was catastrophic. Appalachia's overdose mortality rate for working-age adults is now 52% higher than the rest of the country. Entire communities have been hollowed out not by mining, but by addiction. Pill mills operated openly. Families were destroyed, and the same isolation that once made the mountains a fortress now made them a trap. But here is the thing about Appalachia that no statistic captures. These mountains have been exploited for centuries. Their people have been stereotyped, dismissed, and forgotten. Their resources have been extracted, and their wealth shipped elsewhere. And yet, the Appalachian Trail stretches 2,190 miles from Georgia to Maine, through some of the most breathtaking wilderness in North America. Country music was born in Bristol, Tennessee, in 1927, when Jimmie Rodgers and the Carter family recorded what Johnny Cash called the single most important event in the history of country music. The Great Smoky Mountains are the most visited national park in the United States. Over 300 species of native fish swim in Appalachian streams, more freshwater diversity than almost anywhere in the temperate world. The mountains formed 480 million years ago. They have survived ice ages, continental drift, and the slow grinding of time that wore the Himalayas of the ancient world down into the green ridgelines you see today. The Cherokee survived removal. The miners survived the coal wars. The communities are surviving the opioid crisis, not because anyone is saving them, but because Appalachian people have always saved themselves. That's the real history of Appalachia. Not the punchline, not the stereotype. A place older than almost anything on this continent, shaped by people who refused to leave even when everything was taken from them. If you found this fascinating, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments which history you'd like to see next. As always, we'll see you in the past.